my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
I want to say a big good evening going out to every single one of our listeners all over the world, wherever you may be. It's another Saturday of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
I paid for my crime.
And you got me, your host, Kervin Julien, alongside my co-host, regular sidekick, shotgun runner, Dr. David Ramey, and our featured guest today, George Barwood.
Didn't really care about the system. It was all about survival. It was do or die. I had too many rivals. I was too young and foolish to stay in school. I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
It's been a very indifferent week here in the UK. Weather up and down.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Suppose it's a FA Cup weekend and people are looking for those underdog knockouts, and we've had one. Leicester been knocked out by Millwall in the last minute, injury time. Huddersfield holding Man City. Burnley being knocked out by Lincoln. Meanwhile, across the water, Donald Trump is still dodging bullets. Mike Pence shows that he can speak on his own without having puppet strings around the back of him, or does he? And it just goes on. This week on Issues Today, we're looking at Free Coach Jason with Advocate George Barwood, who's going to be coming on shortly after we've had our intro from Dr. David Ramey. So please hang tight. Don't forget you can join us on www.worldjamglobalradio.com and all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook. Don't forget the TuneIn app.
Like an ordinary citizen again.
But we're going to be having a conversation.
Statewide, worldwide. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my feet. I was swimming in women. I had girls all over the street. I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail. Trying to cope with this living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
In fact,
I sold more drugs than Superfly, but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you. I had to repent. I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid.
We do have some shows of great interest coming up.
Over since I've gotten older, the life I used to live.
4th of March, we've got Foods Not Bombs with Keith McHenry, Desiree Lynn.
Nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Another one to look out for on the 11th of March.
Especially all you haters. Already did my time. Paid for my crime.
Loving an Alien.
Already did my time.
Moving into April.
My crime. Already did my time.
The opening statements are going on right now.
Witch Child. Children of Congo. Labeled as witches. children of sorcery, turned into outcasts, made homeless, abandoned by their families, and left to fend for themselves. All these shows and many more to come right here on World Jam Global Radio's Issues Today. But right now we're going to hand over to Dr. David Romay.
Hello, Kervin from America.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Dr. David Romay.
Well, Kervin, I'm sorry I missed last week, but sometimes the cloud out the light from this side of the ocean to your side of the ocean, and I know you all miss me very much, and for that I'm grateful. I just wanted to say that to demonstrate that I'm learning to speak like Donald Trump, you see. You know, the difference between God and Donald Trump is that God doesn't think he's Donald Trump. Well, we're in America, and Trump is in the South today. And you know, in America, if the minorities have a race card and the women have a gender card, well, you know, the rednecks have their Trump card. Now, what's going on in America? Well, it's a disaster. Trump had a press conference. Never in the history of this republic have we seen such a fiasco. It was as though the clowns were running the circus instead of the ringleader. It is as though the Boy Scouts were in charge of the army instead of the generals. It was as though ducks were swimming upside down and flying off like storks delivering dinosaur eggs to welcoming parents. In other words, inane, stupid, a travesty, a tragedy. A man who's colored orange, speaking before the nation saying the new black is orange, insulting us all. And he's got his Republican comrades helping him. The Russians are not comrade enough. The Republicans had to be brought in. And McConnell is on the Washington Post newspaper today bragging that the Gorsuch nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States was his nomination. It's the McConnell seat because, contrary to the law and constitution of this great nation, he held up that seat and prevented a black president, somebody he despised for no other reason than he was black, from making the lawful nomination. Vertical pancake. He's nothing but pancake batter stacked one cake upon the other until he's 6 foot of poop. And this man, minorities, doesn't like women, doesn't like gays, doesn't like anybody who's not like himself, is going to sit on the Supreme Court and become the new Scalia. But of course, he's got one advantage. He's not an Italian like Scalia, and they don't have to make excuses for him reigning in supreme justice over this great nation. Remember this, those who voted for Trump voted in large measure because of that Supreme Court seat, and McConnell admitted it today. There are many senators who would not have been elected had that seat not been left open. And the Republicans held out as their barter, as their bribery, as their candy, as their poison to most of us, their hatred of gays and guns and laws against them, guns and laws for them, and abortion and laws against that. This week alone, the Republican Congress passed a law that Trump is going to sign. Get ready for this. Hold on. Take your breath. Yes. 75,000 American citizens who are on diagnosed mental instability status with the Social Security Administration and who receive benefits for mental disability that disallows them from working will now be able to purchase, own, and carry loaded weapons. Think of that. 75,000 people with mental disability are going to be allowed to carry weapons among us because of the Republican Congress selling out like low class fin de nuit in Paris to these NRA freaks. I have never been so astounded by the depths to which these unfathomable evil people will go to fulfill their debts to those who buy them these seats. And the ironic part of it is, just as in England probably and Great Britain, most of these members of Congress and your parliament will never even be remembered. They won't even be known. And yet they sit in their back benches with their thumbs up their rear ends and vote for catastrophes. And I want to ask you, do you think for 1 second these people who are putting guns and weapons in the hands of people unqualified to possess such weapons will ever take the blame when we have the next Sandy Hook, Newtown, Aurora, Orlando, Chicago massacre? Will they take the blame? Of course not. Now Trump, who is about as thin as saran wrap when it comes to his feelings, had this press conference. And instead of criticizing Michael Flynn, dishonored the armed forces of this great nation, a man who wears 3 stars on his shoulders, instead of insulting him for taking millions of dollars from Russia, spying for Russia, corrupting the American constitutional system and election, stealing the election from the Americans' choice, 3 million more for Hillary, for this Trumpster, instead of criticizing him for lying to the Vice President of the United States of America, he blames the people who leaked the information. I mean, really, I'm coming to London. I'm going to rob Barclays Bank and take out and then I want the chief of police at Scotland Yard to blame Kervin for telling on me. I mean, it's insane. I mean, why don't you focus on the one who took the gold? Now, let me say this. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who I refuse to call by his nickname Bibi or Bibi or Bibi, because he's not a Bibi to me. He's a war criminal, and I'm not giving a lovely nickname to a war criminal, appeared in America. This guy was jumping like a jack-in-the-box, wound up to the point of orgasm. He was so happy and thrilled because President Obama put this little war criminal in his place and made him come in the back door of the White House. And this time he got to come in through the state south portico, where queens and kings and presidents came in through that door, jumping up and down with his wife, who I will not comment about. And I'm telling you, you would think he was frothing at the mouth like a 6-month-old seeing his mother's titty for the first time. It was the most disgusting, disgraceful, imbecilic, amateurish, plain sight ignorance I have ever seen in my life. And then he stood there with Trump, who didn't receive a briefing, did not have the Secretary of State present, did not have anyone else present. And Trump says, I'm for either 1 state or 2 state, whatever the people like. Oh, great. That's like George and Kervin. And they asked me, what do you think should happen to George or Kervin? And I say, well, you know, Kervin is my flesh and blood son. I love him so much. So I'm for the death penalty for one of them. Whichever one wants to get it can get it. Are you stupid? Are you insane? Like the Palestinians are going to go along with a 1-state solution? I mean, where are you from? Do you have butterflies in your brain? Do you have cockroaches in your butt? What is your problem? rednecks are not even that dumb. Now, let me get to this point. There are 11 million Americans who are of Mexican descent. Some have documentation, some don't. 4 million are children of the 11 million. Now Trump is illegally sending in the National Guard and sheriffs and marshals to tear these people away from their families. Imagine America when you're 22, you get married, you have children. Those children are American citizens. Now they're 7, 8, 10 years old, and you and your wife have to go back to Mexico, and the children are put where? In orphanages? In jail? Where? They're American citizens. You know, I don't remember anybody complaining when 2 million Russian Jews came to America under Henry Kissinger, when 3 million Vietnamese came to America under Jerry Ford. I don't remember anybody complaining when 1 million Cubans came here under Jimmy Carter. What is the problem with the Mexicans? It is racism. It is disgusting. It is imbecilic, and it is a moral catastrophe. Now, remember Donald Trump. I love WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, get those 30,000 emails from Hillary. Russia, if you're listening, get those 30,000 emails and leak them. I love the WikiLeaks. Now, all of a sudden, he wants to use the Justice Department under the rule of the Alabama redneck racist imbecile Jeff Sessions to chase down the leakers. Well, I say chase down the criminals. Now, let me wind up by saying this. If we have ever had a cabinet more dirty, more infiltrated with the scum of the swamp, we have it now. DeVos, who can't even spell, Secretary of Education. Posty, who beat the hell out of his wife and runs these naked women eating juicy hamburgers and hot dogs like they're devouring some kind of a hunk from a TV show that's non-existent. He had to resign. Flynn had to resign. And then you've got Howard refuses to serve. And you got Petraeus, a bigamist and an adulterer and a spy chief. He refuses to sign. Then you've got Kushner calling up CNN and trying to buy the Marlins, and got Ivanka working as the first lady. Let me remind you of something. Do you know why Donald Trump's wives are mostly foreigners? Because, believe it or not, there is work Americans will not do. Now, let me say this. He is profiting. He complained about President Obama playing golf. President Obama played golf. Get this. The entire private time of the president cost $12 million in 8 years, all right? This guy has already cost us $10 million in 3 weeks. He plays golf every weekend. He flies Air Force One down to Mar-a-Lago. All my friends in Palm Beach tell me the traffic is jammed. Police are everywhere. Coast Guard are skimming up and down, dirtying their boats on the harbors. They are creating a catastrophe for this schmuckhund. Will do anything to get out of the White House because he cannot do his work. They say he roams around in the White House all hours of the night because he doesn't know what to do. So he stops at different presidents and tweets out a message to America like we even care. I tell you, keep this man out of Great Britain. Not long ago, 20 years ago, I recall being in Britain, and a man couldn't sleep at night, and he was roaming around Buckingham Palace, and he wound up in the Queen's bedroom. I remember that, and that man was related to Donald Trump. Now, let me finish with saying this. We are at a time in our history when America is changing if we don't stand up. And these massive rallies at Republican events are opposing him shutting down the National Endowment of the Arts, the National Endowment of the Humanities. They're opposing him cutting down Obamacare and 22 million Americans without health insurance, hospitals going crazy with debts and not being able to cover emergency rooms, and pharmaceutical companies are going to lose billions, and they're going to be on top of him. Believe me, there's an old saying in America, I'm going to be on that man like stink on shit. And that's where we're going. We are going to be on this Trump, and that man who stood up at that press conference and repeated basically what his little robots, Kushner, Bannon, Stephen Miller, and that awful, terrible, wicked witch from the West or East or wherever that woman in the Wizard of Oz is from, wherever that Kellyanne Conway, whatever dinosaur vagina she fell from, that antiquated symbol of evil will go with the rest of them, because America is a lot stronger than that one orange-haired, pompous, fake, billionaire liar, Donald Trump. And that's the way it is in America today.
Woo! David. I think we should have you just as the advocate for just get rid of the Trump campaign. That was absolutely an awesome update, and maybe I don't want you to take any weeks off, but every time you have a week off or a couple of weeks off, you come back with a bang. That really was a bang. And believe you me, Donald Trump continues to consume the news right here in the UK, and I think most people are throwing him up daily now. I don't think he's as popular as he was when he first won the election, and he's going to be even less popular as people begin to realise that he actually hasn't got any politics. So that's the way it is in America today. Thank you very much.
Kervin, let me ask you one question.
Go ahead, my friend.
Do you remember all the people we've had on this show before the election who said there would be no difference between Trump and Hillary?
Yeah. I get it, David. I absolutely get it. There is a difference.
Put them under a lie detector test.
Yeah. I think we would have seen a significant difference. That's without a shadow of a doubt. And even I've got to take back what I said, because to me one was a racist, the other one was a crook, and neither one of them deserved to be in the seat. But if there was going to be anybody in the seat, I think right now I'd have preferred it to have been Hillary, without a doubt. Our guest that we're going to have on the show today is a guy by the name of George Bearwood, and he's actually going to be coming on very shortly, and he is part of the Free Coach Jason campaign, and he's an advocate. But let me just read this to you from the Free Coach website. Mr. Sadowski, coach, is an innocent man facing multiple charges stemming from allegations on the night of July the 1st, 2013. Coach was maliciously prosecuted and was wrongfully convicted of multiple charges in March of 2014. In December of 2015, the Michigan Court of Appeals handed down a unanimous decision vacating all of Coach's convictions. The court specifically stated, despite the prosecution's arguments on appeal, this was not a case with overwhelming evidence of guilt. It comes down to being a case of he said, she said. There was significant exculpatory evidence. Mr. Vanderschaff specifically testified that the victim's injuries were consistent with either version of events. And we're going to come to that later on. And although the police officers gave testimony regarding the observations, the prosecution highlights nothing from their testimony that disproves Sadowski's rendition beyond a reasonable doubt. The victims also had many discrepancies in their accounts of the night and crimes, and Coach is now facing another malicious prosecution of these same alleged crimes, and the trial has been set for March the 6th, 2017. And what we're trying to do here now is just spread the word and get people to support in any way that they can. And now we're going to hand over to George. George, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about
Kervin.
yourself.
Yes.
And tell us why this particular case caught your attention.
Well, okay. I run a group that's called the Wrongly Convicted Group, and we really, what we do is we listen when people approach us. I started this about 2-3 years ago now. What we try and do is document cases of wrongful conviction that are still happening, that haven't been turned over, exonerated, and we've really found a lot of such cases, getting on for about 200 that we're now supporting in some way. Often just to people who've been steamrollered by the US justice system and want a bit of moral support, hand-holding, advocacy. So I think it was about mid-January when Sarah posted in the Facebook group that we run, introducing us to this case. And so we picked it up. We said, yes, we had a look at the appeal ruling. This is, when you look below the surface, it's a very clear wrongful conviction. The thing to realise about that appeal rulings tend to be stated in very understated language. But if you actually look at the details of what was in that appeal, I mean, it's a total. I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it. It's when it says the victims had many discrepancies in their accounts. They're not joking. You know, the appeal ruling was very much understating that. There's just at every step, these two women who made these accusations couldn't come up with a story they couldn't come up with two stories that agreed on the details. All they could agree about is that he'd assaulted them. And
George, could I interrupt a moment? Would you start at the beginning for our audience? A lot of people aren't aware of who Jason Sadowski is, where Marquette County is, or what are the basic facts of the case. What happened? He ran a martial arts studio. He tied them up. Right. Start over and tell us so we have some context.
Sure. Well, we're near the shores of Lake Michigan, Upper Michigan.
Okay.
Okay. In a I think it's called a city, but it's a pretty small place. I think in the UK we wouldn't call it much more than a town. And this is July 2013. And yes, Jason owned a business, which was a martial arts studio where he would coach people in martial arts. And in fact, on the Facebook page, we've actually put up a little video of him coaching. I'm not quite sure which sport they're doing. It's some kind of wrestling, and he's sort of just coaching someone how to trip their opponent up and things like that. So he was doing absolutely fine, and he was quite close by. He was just outside a local bar, a couple of 100 yards from the back door of his business, when these two women came up, and they got to chatting a little bit, and they went back to his studio. Now, it turns out these two women were really trouble. I think that's all that can be said about them. They've both got histories.
How old are they?
One of them was about 30. I'm not quite sure of the age of the other. Probably similar sort of age.
Okay.
And they've both got methamphetamine addiction problems, and they started stealing money from him. There was no dispute about this. The only dispute over is really over how much money they took. They say they took tiny amounts, like $4 or something, whereas in fact he had $250 in his wallet, according to what Coach Jason said at the first trial. So anyway, yeah. So they were taking his money and also other things, a watch, I think. And then they started making a great scene. I think the thing to remember at this point is if they'd just taken the money and walked out of his studio, he'd have just called the police and said, "These women have just robbed me." So what happened is they then started making a great scene, hitting each other. According to Jason's account, he was saying, "I want my money back. If I don't get my money back, I'm going to call the police." And after many hours, one of the women actually called the police, and and started making a load of allegations that they'd been assaulted, tortured, tied to posts, tied to 2 poles in a basement there. And what they really did is they got their story in first. And it's all really a question of their word against Jason Sadowski's. There's a few more complications because there were a couple of other witnesses at this, I don't think you really call it a party, but whatever it was, at this gathering. And so, yeah, he was wrongly convicted in March 2014, and it was overturned December 2015. So we're now a total of 4 years on from, well, nearly 4 years on from July 2013. It's quite a complex case. It
sounds a complex case, but let me just take you back to it a second. You talk about there being a gathering, some sort of a party or whatever, and you're talking about there being other witnesses, and so these 2 women, ladies, girls, whatever you want to call them, have attempted to rob him. He's found out, and now he's threatening to call the police. Why didn't he just call the police?
Well, that's a good question. Why do people not call the police? I think he's a very kind-hearted person, and I think, to be honest, he didn't really want to.
No, I can get that. I just wanted to give you an opportunity.
There's probably a little bit more to it. There was bad feeling between him and the local police.
Right. Okay.
I think I just want to put it that way because I don't want to go too much.
So while they were down in the basement, are you trying to say that upstairs there was a shindig, a party, a gathering?
They were having drinks. They were smoking some marijuana. He was a legal grower of marijuana. This is North Michigan. I presume that it's legal in that state. I think it's basically for medical purposes, isn't it? And one of the women had expressed an interest in buying some marijuana from him, and the other had expressed an interest in martial arts. There is some question of whether they were out to set him up right from the start, incidentally. So there's all sorts of questions here. Were they actually gearing up to make some false accusations? Both these women, certainly one of the women, had got a lengthy criminal record and a lengthy history of drug taking, all sorts of problems. She'd had a string of children who'd been taken away from her. She was fighting to get custody back of these children. In fact, probably still is. And her problem was, well, we don't know the exact reasons. Obviously, she says she was homeless. She says she was. I mean, you can assume that she was short of money. So they were both potentially out to steal money, but also I have some suspicion that they were actually out to set him up in the first place because the police chief had this grudge against him, and that was really the scene, and that's possibly why when they made these allegations, the police seemed to really go with what the women were saying. They didn't really seem to doubt them very much at all, even though there were all these discrepancies and they couldn't agree about what had actually happened.
How much of Coach Jason's version of events do you feel, in your opinion, was appropriately investigated from the get-go?
Well, the investigation wasn't good. It's one of these. For a start, they didn't gather any forensic evidence. And there was forensic evidence that could have been gathered. And in fact, for the retrial, the defence had been requesting DNA tests to be done, but that's being denied by the judge. She says they would be unlikely to yield useful information. There's all sorts of DNA tests that could be done. For instance, one of the women alleged that the other woman had been forced to put her hand in her vagina to search for the missing money. and swabs were taken of one of the women's hands, but the swabs were never tested. So the truth of that allegation, we don't even know if it's true or false. The other woman completely denied it. So one of the women said this happened. The other woman said, no, I never did that. And it was just all like this, just from the very offset. And then the other thing was, I think I need to talk about who the women are. One of the women was called Angel, and I think she was probably the main instigator of what was going on. And the other woman was called Becky. I can give the full names: Angel Paris and Becky Brissett. And they were both trouble, but I think Angel was very much the leader. I think I've got a strong feeling that Becky Brissett was actually very drunk and probably didn't actually remember very much about what happened at all. And it's interesting, there's no record of Becky being interviewed. So, they went back to the police station. We know she was interviewed, because we've got the record of the other interview with Angel, and the local police chief comes in and says, well, Becky's saying this. Becky's saying you were forced to put your hand in her vagina, and Angel then says, no, I never did such thing. Well, after a while, she ums and ahs a bit about it, but when they bring up DNA tests possibly being done, she says, oh no, that didn't happen. So that was one kind of DNA test that wasn't done. There was another thing that Angel had fake fingernails on at the start of the evening, and they were littered around various locations, I think in an upstairs room. And according to the defence, she was fighting with Becky, whereas they claim that Jason was punching them. And that's another problem, because the police, when that came out, they said, well, Jason had been arrested by this time, immediately, basically. They said, well, we'd better look at his hands to see if he's been punching them. Well, there wasn't any redness, and they told a sort of incredible story of him punching them across the room. And then at every turn, the details are different. One of the women says she was sat on a chair when she was punched, and the other woman says no, she was sat on a bed. So whenever they ask for details about what happened, they don't agree. And this goes on, and altogether you can pick out probably 8, 9, 10 discrepancies. And then if you look at the medical evidence, it doesn't substantiate what they're saying. I mean, I think at the first trial, the doctor that testified said, well, it was compatible with either version. But I mean, the way I see it, I don't really see that.
Let's just stop there for a second, George. Tell us a bit more about Coach Jason, the man, prior to these charges. What sort of man was he in the community? How was he known? What was he known by?
He was running. He was really quite. I mean, he'd learnt martial arts at a very young age, and then prior to the events, he'd been running this martial arts studio in Ishpeming and had quite a lot of success. The people in particular, there was one woman he'd coached, I believe, who had actually had a great success. I'm not that familiar with the details of it all, but yes, she'd sort of really done quite well. But not just that. He'd had several people he'd coached who were doing very well. The gym was very popular, probably for that reason. His coaching was going extremely well. I'm not sure what the business model was. I think the way it works is that promoters, like boxing, how boxing works. I'm not hugely familiar with the world of martial arts, but I think it's similar to a boxing bout. You'll have promoters who want to put on an event, and they'll pay a bit of money out, and he would get some of that money, but the winner would keep their winnings. Whoever, I don't know what sort of amounts we're talking about, to be honest. I'm not familiar with that. And so, he was doing quite well. Obviously, he was very popular with the people he was coaching, and quite a few of them, I think, are going to testify on his behalf at the trial, at the retrial. I think they testified in the first trial, just to his general good character. He's got no record of violence at all. He'd never touched a woman or anyone, let alone a woman. And I mean, possibly, you might question his character in some ways. Perhaps, he was a bit of an arse on occasion. He'd been involved with quite a lot of women. But there was nothing at all in his past to suggest these allegations were true. However, I have to say, the local detective had some other idea about it. Or if he didn't have an idea, he did feed some misinformation to the women. Whether he believed it to be true at the time, I don't know. But he fed them information which was really a gross mischaracterization of Jason's past, which I don't want to go into too much detail.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to try and get
the reason would be is that I don't want to go into that in too much detail because it won't be part of the trial in all probability.
No, that's fine.
Can I ask you on what basis were the convictions overturned?
Right, that's quite a complicated one. It was, I think, the main grounds was confrontation rights.
What was what? I didn't hear.
Confrontation rights. I think is that the Fifth or Sixth Amendment? Sorry, I sometimes get them mixed up.
I'm not sure what that means.
It's the right. There was to go into that. I need to explain first. There was another person in the basement. While whatever was going on. A man by the name of Leroy Cope. Now, the first thing to understand about him is he had severe dementia problems. He was an alcoholic. He was renting the basement of the building. Jason didn't own the building. I think he was renting it from some landlord. And this man, Leroy Cope, who had quite severe dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever problems, was living in the basement, and he was down there when the women were down there. And what happened is when the allegations were made, there was a preliminary hearing, and the counsel for Mr. Cope decided to side with the prosecution version of events, but to say my client was acting under duress, So, I mean, the fundamental question is, when the 9/9, it was evident that the two women had in fact been taped to these poles. Now the question is, was it Jason who'd caused this to happen, or had they essentially asked for it to be done to themselves? Which is quite a strange thing to understand, why they would ever do such a strange thing. But when you think it through, it does actually make quite a lot of sense. And we're on why it was going to be overturned. Well, the point is that Cope, his counsel, decided on duress defence, which wasn't true. He didn't even speak to his client before the preliminary hearing, and he decided he would go with the prosecution version of events and offer a duress defence. And what happened is that Cope did not testify at the trial as a result, because if he had testified, he would testify it wasn't like that at all. And as a result of this, there were some statements made by Cope that came in that Jason couldn't cross-examine.
That's Sixth Amendment. That's Sixth Amendment.
Yeah. Sixth Amendment. I'm sorry, I get the Fifth and Sixth. Yeah.
It's the Sixth. You have the right to confront witnesses against you.
Sixth Amendment. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was one reason. I mean, another reason would have been the joinder of trials, because they had these totally conflicting defences.
But let me ask you something. I mean, for our audience's sake, if you were determined to set someone up, you put your finger on them, so to speak. I mean, it's not inconceivable that you would ask that person to do something to you that to him might seem in a playful, sexual, whatever way to seem quite innocent at the moment, and he does it, and then things turn badly, and it looks very, very bad indeed, even though you did ask for it yourself. I mean, in fact, it wasn't that. It was actually Cope
that would have been helping take them to these polls.
Okay, and then he didn't. So he was basically told, if you work with us, we're not going to press charges against you.
Yeah, I mean, what they may have said to him, and we can't tell, what they may have said to Cope is, oh, Jason wants this to be done because he wants his money back, or, we want to give him his money back and we're not leaving until he gets it back. All this sort of slightly strange stuff.
Have you ever interviewed Cope?
No. I mean,
he was not on the stand.
He didn't testify. He did, however,
give. How could anything he ever said come into a courtroom?
Well, it came in via a police officer who said.
But that's hearsay. That's hearsay.
It is exactly hearsay,
and that's a part of the basis of the overturning it.
That was one of the reasons it was overturned. Yeah, probably another reason it would have been overturned was because the two trials were joined.
Let me ask you about the prosecutor. I mean, you've mentioned the police chief had something against him. That's all fine. Of course, Kervin, this goes to what we always talk about. Prosecutors are part of the law enforcement. They carry badges too, so they work together. But what about the prosecutor, George? That's very interesting to me.
Well,
what's his role?
I think, to be honest, the thing to understand here is that Angel is a manipulator, and the prosecutor was.
Wait, who's Angel?
Angel is one of the women that was tied to the polls. Okay. We've got Angel and Becky. It's actually quite easy because we've got three people in the basement, and they actually, the letters are A, B, C.
Yeah, Angel, Becky, and Cope.
Angel, Becky, and Cope.
But none of them could cope with it.
So
I mean, Angel is the 44-year-old or the 30?
No, Angel is aged about 30. I don't know how old Becky was.
She's Becky, 44.
What I've been told about Becky is that she was a victim of some sort of hit and run incident as a child. She was quite ill, and she was on medications. And the reason Becky, I believe, I've been told that Becky was basically exploiting her to get pills. Becky was on all sorts of pills, any pills she could get hold of, really. And so there was a relationship there. In fact, Becky became quite ill not very long afterwards. Sorry, it's complicated. No, hold on. Sorry, I've got mixed up there.
Okay, look.
I've got mixed up there. Sorry, I've got two people mixed up. But anyway, where were we? We were...
Let me just take you somewhere a second. It's in order for us to understand what was taking place down there. There's something that I want to throw out on the table. When we talk about Angel and Becky, you're talking about people that have a dependency on drugs, meths in particular.
That's right.
Okay, so now we've got to try to understand the mentality of a drug user or somebody that's dependent on drugs. Their behavior would be irrational, and in pursuit of getting the grace and favor to avoid the threats that whatever the police had been putting them under in order for them to carry out this, and what they might get from it if they were to succeed, they would be pretty desperate. So how much of their character was scrutinized during this trial?
Angel was very desperate. There's no doubt about it. For one thing, she was due in drug court in the morning, and she would have been out drinking, taking drugs, and if something hadn't happened, she would have been in breach of all her probation conditions. She would have been hauled off to jail. She would have lost her children probably, who she was desperately trying to get custody back of. So
this actually saved her from that.
Yes, she had an awful lot to gain by turning into an informant. Becky, we believe, had previously been an informant for the police, setting people up. And whether Angel had been an informant before, I don't know, but she certainly knew the game and how to play it. And I mean, this is a big problem in wrongful convictions. It runs through so many cases. Is witnesses who
absolutely
got huge incentives to lie in court, and to make false allegations, or to transfer blame or to get deals for themselves, become protected. And that's a real key to understanding this case.
Okay. Let me interject again here, right? Because I want to go back to some of what they've said and some. So here's a gathering. People are smoking and drinking. These girls have made allegations that for all of this to have been going on, with all the punching going around the place and all of that, there would have been some noise. There would have been some screaming, because for a man who is qualified and trained as a martial arts tutor, he's going to be quite forceful, powerful, and strong. And him hitting on a woman, and especially one that's going to be defenseless, because under the influence of drugs, you are not in full control of yourself and your bodily functions, right? So these individuals that are also taking part in this gathering, party, smoking, whatever they were doing, has any of them testified that this is a load of codswallop and they didn't hear any noise, they didn't hear any fighting, they didn't hear any screaming?
Well, things started off upstairs in the gym. So you've got coke down in the basement, okay? So things are starting off upstairs, and you've just got the three of them, Jason, Angel, and Becky, upstairs. And that's where they claim that what their story is, and it doesn't really sound very plausible, what their story is that they took this money, just $4. Well, they kept on testifying to different amounts. But according to one account, $4. And then Angel says she gave the money back because out of the kindness of her heart, she didn't want to take it from him. And at this point, he said, "Right, you bitches, you've picked on the wrong person," and started punching them and assaulting them. And then, according to them, according to one of them, but not the other, he got a sword and forced them down to the basement and take them up to these poles and started torturing them. All for $4.
All for $4.
Right, okay. According to them. Okay, so this is their version of events, which, to be honest, I doubt any jury would believe. But obviously they believed something. So, but then, I mean, what I believe happened is that, yes, so the women are making a great scene about returning the money, which is getting him very confused. They started fighting amongst each other, and I think he separated them and said, "Look, I want my money back, or I'm calling the police." You can. At some stage, they were smoking and drinking. So he said, and they run out of the type of cigarettes one of the women liked. So he said, "Well, we can go down to the basement. Leroy's got some cigarettes." And then they got down there, and at one stage, he just basically left them to it with Leroy Cope, who was easily manipulated, I think we could say, because he had this dementia, Alzheimer's. Quite an easy person to influence, who would just sort of help with whatever he was asked to help with. And what I believe happened is that Angel basically came up with this idea. It's got double meanings to it all the way through, but either she was thinking, if we do this, Jason is never going to be able to call the police because it's going to look, he'll realise this is going to look strange. Either they were thinking that, or she was thinking, well, we're going to demonstrate that we will give the money back. In fact, they weren't giving the money back. It's pretty clear that Angel did actually keep about half the money that she'd originally stolen. And she was creating this huge scene. But of course, once the police were called, Jason decided to say nothing to them. He didn't give them any statement at all. He said, I'll have a lawyer, please. And the women made all these allegations. And because when the police arrived, there was this tape, you could see that the women apparently had been taped the balls, and there's no doubt they were. It's just a question of whose idea was it, really. Had Angel staged the whole thing? And fortunately for Jason, there is plenty of evidence that A, that they were lying, and B, that it was staged. Specifically, she says in the 911 call that Becky is still taped to a pole. But in fact, when the police arrived in just a few minutes, lo and behold, she's not taped to the pole, or she can easily free herself without any assistance. So that's one hole in their story. And of course, you've got the fact that Angel was able to actually use this phone to call 911, and that has to be explained as well. You know,
How does she call the police while she's taped to a pole?
Well, she didn't. She wasn't. So she came up with this. Her extension to her story to somehow explain that Jason had said, "Oh, you've got to kill Becky, and then I'll let you go." Okay, this is the story. This is the inventive mind of a desperate meth addict.
Well,
so
we laugh, but this is actually state mental evidence.
This is the story which the jury bought. I mean, I've seen any number of cases where the jury will buy strange, extraordinary stories, even when there's numerous discrepancies in the accounts of these women. I mean, there's other signs. You know, they refused to go to hospital. Neither of them had a rape kit done, even though there were all these allegations that. Did
they claim there was sexual?
Angel was offered a rape kit, and she adamantly refused it, probably because she had money still stashed inside.
Did they claim that they were sexually assaulted?
Well, one claimed that the other was forced to sexually assault the other to look for the money. That's the allegation, and the other totally denied it. So,
well, they claimed rape, kidnapping, violence, and torture, right?
Yes. So,
okay.
I mean, and what happened is the story grew and grew. I mean, initially she said on the 911 call, "Oh, I'm, you know, we've been taped to these poles for hours." I'll actually read you the 911 call because it's actually I could even play it to you possibly.
Let me ask you a question first. What kind of attorney did Mr. Sadowski have?
That's a problem. The first problem was that he had a different attorney for the preliminary hearing and the trial.
Okay. So he had okay, I understand. And what happened at the trial?
The attorney was very unprepared. He asked for an extension, I believe. He didn't get it. He was only on the case. It was only put on the case 1 month before the trial. He didn't start preparing for it for 2 weeks, and he just was totally unprepared. I mean,
this is a case where a man could be in prison for the rest of his life.
Absolutely.
And he had 2 weeks to prepare.
Yeah, and by all accounts, he was overwhelmed during the trial.
Okay, he was acting by himself. And how long did the trial last?
He didn't have time to read the preliminary transcripts. Or anything.
How long did the trial last?
I think it was about 5 days. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that.
Did Mr. Sadowski claim to have insufficient representation?
I don't know about that. It probably would have developed into that, but because the conviction was overturned on other grounds,
right.
I mean, there were numerous irregularities. I mean, one important irregularity, I already mentioned that both Angel and Becky were interviewed when they got back to the police station, because everyone got, when there was a 911 call, the police came, they found the women not taped to the poles. And everyone got arrested. Jason, Cope, Angel and Becky. Well, no, Angel and Becky weren't arrested. Angel was initially handcuffed and was absolutely going bananas, as you can imagine. But anyway, yes, they all went off to the police station, and Angel and Becky were interviewed. There's no record at all of the interviews of Becky. No reports, no recordings, nothing. And of the interviews with Angel, one of them was mislaid, never conveyed to the defence. So even if this attorney had been on the ball, he wouldn't have had this interview. And if you look at this interview, it's extremely revealing, and that a lot of the things she says in this initial interview, the first interview when she gets to the police station, do not match her testimony. They just contradict at every turn what she eventually testified to. And in fact, you can also see that she changed her testimony to match Becky's testimony at the preliminary hearing. One important thing to understand here is that Becky testified at the preliminary hearing and then a couple of months later was dead of a drug overdose.
Oh.
While shooting up with Angel, I believe.
Oh.
Wow.
So then Jason's at this trial where he's got this testimony of Becky, which is being played back, because, I mean, there was some cross-examination. He can't cross-examine Becky at trial. So the defence objected to that, but was overruled. I mean, you can have testimony coming in from a preliminary hearing. It does happen from pre-trial hearings. You know, I've seen that in other cases.
Yeah.
So you've got one dead witness. You can't cross-examine anymore, and who was actually cross-examined by a different attorney. The attorney Jason had, I believe, didn't even have time to read the preliminary transcripts. So he didn't know how to impeach anyone. And because he didn't have this initial interview, he couldn't impeach Angel properly. I mean, in spite of that, in fact, if you look at the transcript, there were these inconsistencies that come up in the appeal ruling. I mean, I'd like to actually just read some of them just to you so you can understand. I mean, I've got a page here. They did not provide a consistent amount story regarding the amount of money taken. So that's the first thing. Angel testified she took $4, giving $2 to Becky. However, the first responding police officer testified that Angel informed him that she had stolen $3 and Becky had taken 10. Becky, on the other hand, testified that Angel took a couple of dollars while Becky grabbed a handful of change. So there you immediately have the stories completely diverging. And, you know, so this did come out at trial, but I think the other problem is that at the end of the trial, the lawyer simply didn't point out the women were lying to the jury. I read through his closing argument, and he just seemed to sort of collapse and not use what he even had. I mean, that was the first point. And became next the story about when they gave the money back, or, you know, Angel said she asked to use the bathroom. She then confessed to Sadowski, great sob story. Oh, I shouldn't have robbed you. Here's my money back. However, the other woman, Becky, testified that Sadowski went to the bathroom, and when he returned, he accused them of taking the money. Okay, so a different story again. And then they didn't agree about whether they were arguing upstairs or in the basement. And then the next point is Becky came up with a story that she was punched, fell back and grabbed onto the curtains and pulled them off. But when the police arrive and take photographs, the curtains are still perfectly okay. So where did that story come from? And then we've got this story I've already mentioned that Becky's claims that Sadowski made her lie on the bed and forced Angel to insert her hand into her vagina to look at them, see if there was money hidden there. And Angel denied that happened. And then next thing, they didn't agree about who had taken them to the polls. Was it Cope or was it Sadowski or was it both of them? They couldn't agree about that. So there's, you know, just reading the appeal the appeal ruling, which is, you know, obviously very well-established information, you can immediately see all these discrepancies that mean that the case is ridiculous. And then things that the lawyer didn't come up in the trial because he didn't have this interview with Angel is that she changed her story about various other things. At one stage she claims that she threw the phone onto the bed, and then she says it was on the floor. Later on, she threw it on the floor, and then Angel changed her testimony about this sword that he's meant to have used to force them downstairs. After hearing Becky testify at the preliminary hearing, so it's all really about it's partly about inadequate.
Well, let me ask you this: seeing how it is, and you're helping him, why would the prosecutor want to go forward with another trial, realizing that one of the two primary witnesses is dead, Mr. Cope is Alzheimer's or worse, and this meth Angel is absolutely manipulative and a liar. Why would he go forward against a businessman who had no problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are surprised this has gone to a retrial.
So how does it justify it?
I mean, if you want to ask me why the prosecutor's going ahead, I can't answer that. You know, I can't delve into his mind. I mean, I actually think I've looked at his profile. I think he seems like a very decent person to me. I'm not saying the prosecutor is being malicious here. I can't allege that. He apparently believes, in spite of all these discrepancies, that the women were telling the truth. And I mean, the other point is that there's a major witness here, who is Sarah. Sarah, sorry, I need to get her name. I'm not even sure quite how you pronounce her name, even though I've been chatting to her quite a bit about the case on Sky, on Facebook. But Sarah is Jason's ex-wife, and she was actually there.
Is that Sarah Pietro?
Sarah Pietro, yes. And she was briefly there. She came down while the women were still there, saw them in the basement, saw they weren't tied to poles when they said they were, saw they were just sitting around smoking and drinking. She wasn't very pleased about it because she didn't think, it was a good idea to have these, women. But anyway, she saw them. She briefly left. And so, of course, she knew absolutely that they were lying. And she's obviously a major alibi witness for the defence here.
Was she in the trial?
Yes. She testified to exactly that she visited the building briefly. I think it was at I'd have to check the timeline. I think it was quite early in the morning. They keep funny hours. I think it was 4:45 or something. She talked to Jason briefly upstairs, came downstairs. He said there were women. Did she know them or something? I don't know the precise testimony. She came down. She only went to the entrance of the room. She saw them sitting on the bed. And in fact, the prosecution claimed she couldn't have seen them because there was something in the way. That's their case. Let me
ask you, George, hold on a second. Have you thought that the prosecutor might have said he's going to retry it in the hope that he would get a plea arrangement from Mr. Sadowski?
Could be. I don't think that's the aim, no. I mean, I think he probably does believe these women. It's an incredible thing, confirmation bias. You can disregard anything, I presume.
Here's another thing, guys, right?
I mean, the jury believed this. I don't think it's unreasonable to believe the prosecutor believed what the jury believed. In spite of, what I've explained to you is how ridiculous this is. These women are not credible. We're not credible witnesses.
How were they able to paint this apparent successful businessman, tutor and teacher of martial arts, and somebody with good repute in the community? How were they able to turn him into this monster that these two
simply based on the women's testimony? That's all that there is to it.
I hear that clearly. The point I'm trying to make is that in any common sense world, that would have been ripped apart with the information that's been provided, with the evidence that I consider absolutely contrary and conflicting from one to the other, and the fact that they've got such an irreputable background. And there's so many inconsistencies, A, with their stories, and B, with everybody else's stories that they go to match. I just can't see how they were able to make that gel.
Well, the one thing to understand is there was lots of pre-trial publicity, and when you have pre-trial publicity, you only get one side of the story. Right. So this was, because of what the women were alleging, women taped to poles, tortured with cigarettes, punched, beaten up, held all night, all this stuff going on, threatened with murder, all this incredibly lurid stuff makes headlines. Okay. And when it's reported in the news, you only get the prosecution story. You just get the allegations, and who's to ever guess that they might not be true. And so by the time the jury came to be picked, every juror pretty much said, their opinion who was guilty, because how would they have they'd heard it on the news, they'd seen it, everyone was chatting about it. You get this. You can so easily get a complete. Find it very hard to pick a fair jury in those circumstances.
Do you think that the media were biased in their reporting as well?
I mean, what happens in a criminal case? The defence don't say anything normally until trial.
Right.
So you've got just
only one side, and the press sensationalizes.
You've got a set of allegations. You've got a set of allegations broadcast on TV news or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to gainsay them. There's nothing to suggest these women might be lying. There's no information that they were drug addicts. There's no information their stories were not consistent. There's no information that they was stealing money from him. Which they admit. So. I mean, I haven't seen the pre-trial publicity. I think that's all been taken down now. But you can imagine what the news.
So let's just go back to that for a second. So they admit to stealing the money from him, correct?
But not the amount. Yes.
Yeah, but irrespective of the amount. So they admit that on invitation they're at this place, and while they're being catered for at this gathering, party, shindig, whatever we want to call it. They choose to steal of the person that's invited them or allowed them to be in their premises.
So he's now a victim.
Right. So yeah, there you have it. The initial victim was Mr. Sadowski, right? Because they're trying to rob him. They're trying to steal from him. However little,
by the women's account.
Right. By their own accounts, by their own admission. And irrespective of how much it is, $4, $2, $20. Is irrespective. They're actually stealing from him, and he now finds out that they're stealing. And do they at any time admit that he threatens to call the police?
I'm not sure about that question. I would have to check the testimony whether they agree he threatened to call the police. I mean, what's so incredible about their story, in a way, is that they claim that he went berserk after they handed the money back. I mean, I suppose you could say, well, yeah, we took this money and he found out and then he started threatening us, but that's not even their story. Their story is we gave the money back and then he went berserk. So it makes even less sense. I mean, possibly the jury might have believed, they took this money and then he went berserk to get it back. Yeah. Because that is closer to the truth. But
the jury didn't. That's not what the jury believed. The jury believed what they said, which was after they gave the money back is when he went berserk. And I'm struggling for this.
I don't believe the jury could have believed the women's story in full, but they must have somehow believed part of it, I think.
But if the prosecutor had made the case that they said they took $4 or $10, and he believed they took $250, and they said they gave back $4 or $10, that's still leaving him $240 short at the maximum and $246 short at the high end. It seems to me that in that case, he could very well go berserk because he would be very angry that they've not only insulted him, but stolen from him.
Well, that's true. You've made a slightly more sensible prosecution case than the women testified to.
Absolutely,
right,
and that's the whole point.
And who's to say the prosecutor didn't make that case?
Well, I don't think that was his case. His case would have been that women were telling the truth, but the jury might have decided, that makes more sense. Maybe that's what happened. So maybe they were lying about the money. But
here's the thing:
but they weren't lying about him attacking and torturing them, etc., to get the money back. So that would make a bit more sense.
But first of all, let me say this very clearly: in post-George W. Bush, there is no torture. There are only enhanced interrogations.
David, clever, very clever.
Sorry.
The point is, Jason did threaten them, but the only threat, according to him, was that he threatened to call the police, and that's not a crime.
A threat doesn't get you 40 to 60 years in prison.
No,
I mean, that's what he was assigned, right? 40 to 60?
80, I think.
40 to 80 years in prison for threatening a woman. He didn't even rape her. He didn't even have they done any DNA on the fingernail?
Of course, the basis for that sentence is that he's tortured them, he's burned one of them with a cigarette, he's punched them about 80 times, he's taken them to these poles. He's
last week in Connecticut, a man who was part of a murder that took a human life got 5 years in prison for cooperating with the police and talking about the other two. Think about that.
I mean, he was also, incidentally, he was charged with sexual assault of some kind. I don't think it was exactly rape. He was charged with this idea that he forced one of them to put her hand inside the other. He was actually acquitted on that charge by the jury.
Well, every member of the jury would know having that opportunity. Why would we give it to someone else to do?
I mean, another
Michigan.
Another big reason I think he was convicted would be the joinder of the two trials, because you've got Leroy Coates sitting there with his attorney, agreeing with everything the prosecution is saying, and Cope is not testifying to say this is untrue. Jason never asked for any of this to be done and never did anything. He was saying in out of court statements, or in court, but not before the jury. He was saying, I'll actually quote you what he said. He was saying, oh sorry, I've lost it. But he was saying, no, Jason never touched them. Not while he was downstairs. He never did anything. He never laid a hand on them. I'm very sorry for everything that happened. I mean, I think he was manipulated. He was probably told Jason wants these women taped to the pole by Angel or something. Jason wants his money back. So, it does seem that because of the statements that he made, admitting that he helped. I mean, that's one of the great paradoxes, because Angel manipulated this thing because she, at one point, was taped to the pole, and Cope admits it. And then he's sitting there offering a defence of duress, saying, yes, this all happened, but Jason made me do it. So that was really a lot to do with why the conviction happened. I mean, the jury must have been thinking, well, if it wasn't true, why is his defence that, yes, Jason did it all? He was there, he was present the whole time. Why isn't he testifying? Why isn't he saying Jason didn't do this? So the joinder of the trials would be another big issue for the jury. I mean, who do they believe? They could have not believed the amount of money the women took. So maybe they decide, the women are just lying about how much money they took because they don't want to admit they took all this money. Okay, so they'll say, okay, so maybe that's the truth. Really, the women did take the full $250, and he got angry about it, and he was beating them up or punching them or something. So then it becomes a bit more plausible, and they did have these bruises, but it's Angel fighting with Becky, not Jason punching them. He's just there trying to break them up.
Just very quickly, does Jason ever say how much money was taken?
Yes, he testified. He testified he had 250, and he got 125 of it back.
Right.
I mean, the women also, at one stage during the trial, during cross-examination, it's very interesting because the attorney says, okay, so when Jason was arrested, he had $125 in his wallet, even though the women say there was only $4 in there to start with. So this money has miraculously appeared in his wallet. And then at one point, under cross-examination, I think it was Becky, is asked, well, what if we do DNA tests on the money? And then she says, well, Angel had her hand in me, and then she had her hand on this $50, and so that's maybe where the DNA is on it. So she actually admits at that point that there was more money involved here. So clearly, I don't see how the jury could have possibly believed that they only took $4 or whatever. But then that's not the end of the case, is it? Because they could have said, well, the women were lying about that, but maybe they weren't lying about being assaulted, because then it would sort of kind of make more sense, wouldn't it? Maybe he lost his temper because they wouldn't give the money back and punch them and take them to the polls to get the money back. You can come up with either version of events.
But for them to find him guilty, they would have to believe one version or the other. And if they believed if they believed Angel and Becky's story that there was only $4 in it, then what did they make of the amount of money that was in Jason's wallet? And if
who knows?
And if the amount of money that was in Jason's wallet is in effect logged in evidence as to how much money he had on him, then it already proves that they've perjured themselves on the stand.
Absolutely. But they've perjured themselves over and over again, contradicted themselves, changed their stories.
We get that, but the bottom line is, as you continue, my look here, and David, please interject the moment you feel like you can, because for me, where is the defense in all of this, as this concoction of lies and mishaps is spilled out in a courtroom, conflicting one set of evidence against the other, and turning this into a ridicule? Because for me, I just can't see where justice has been served here in any shape or form.
Well, it hasn't. It hasn't so far.
Let me ask you. Where is Mr. Sadowski now? How long has he been where he is now? And when does the prosecutor intend to initiate the new trial? And what kind of representation will he have at the new trial?
Sure. The new trial is on March the 6th, so not long ago, not far away.
Oh, very close. Okay.
The new trial is on March the 6th, and the defence have been doing a lot of preparation this time, a lot better. I think they're going to be a lot better prepared. Sarah Pietro,
yep.
Yes.
Who brought the case to the wrongfully convicted group, and I have also chatted to her on Facebook quite a bit, has been absolutely heroic in basically uncovering this new evidence. If you look on the Facebook page, look, I've forgotten how they put it, but they've found favourable new witnesses, and they've found unfavourable new evidence. So she's done an absolute heroic job. She hired this attorney from her savings, and he's now. But that money has run out, and he's out now actually working pro bono to help him. And the court has refused to pay for his pay public money, even though obviously Jason is indigent. But I think Sarah's been doing a tremendous job gathering new evidence. I mean, you can imagine. Well, I can't go into any of that new evidence because obviously, for tactical reasons, you don't want to disclose anything about what you found before trial.
Right.
No, we get all of that.
Now, have you? Let me ask one more question. Have they spoken to the prosecutor about a settlement before trial or a plea arrangement, or have they tried to?
Not as far as I know. I don't. Not as far as I know, and I don't.
And he has been to a grand jury, so he's been He'd have to be re-indicted to go back to trial. Does he have to be
re-indicted? I don't think so. Yes. No, he's just been granted a new trial. That's
to have a new trial means you've got to be indicted again.
Does it?
Everything that went before is gone. You've got to be re-indicted.
Possibly. I don't know how the indictment works.
So here's the thing.
Let me finish that. Basically, what happens is you go to trial on an indictment. You're convicted. It's overturned. It can be overturned and nothing can happen, or it can be overturned and remanded for a new trial. That is a decision of the prosecutor. If the prosecutor says, I want a new trial, he has to bring it back to a grand jury and have them indict him again.
Okay, but what I think is the case, I don't know the case in Upper Michigan, but you don't have grand juries everywhere nowadays. Sometimes you have a slightly different process. I don't know what the re-indictment process is.
I can't imagine not having a grand jury on a criminal case of that magnitude because it's a guarantee in the Constitution. That's a constitutional guarantee. They can't just do away with it.
I think you'll find grand juries are not universal. They still exist in some places, but in other places, I think.
No.
I mean, I think
for felony,
the original I think it's different in Michigan.
For a felony, that has to be, that's a U.S. constitutional guarantee. It doesn't care what Michigan says. That's a U.S. guarantee for a felony.
Well, I'll have to. I don't know the ins and outs.
Here's the thing: Dr. David Remay's area of expertise is prosecutorial misconduct. So if he tells you that that's how it is, you better take it to the bank that that's how it is.
I think you can look at. If you want to say there's misconduct here, I mean, I wouldn't say there's necessarily particular prosecutorial misconduct in the case, but the fact is, this recording of the first interview was not turned over to the defence. Interestingly, it was turned over to Cope's defence attorney, so they had it, but.
Okay, well, let me say, I just want to say, you are correct that in Michigan, they prefer something called a preliminary hearing, which in the military law is called an Article 32B hearing. I know that because I was in the Army JAG Corps. So they do prefer a preliminary hearing, and a judge basically says, yes, I remand this to a trial, or no, I don't. However, according to lawyers.com, in Michigan, the grand jury process rarely is used in criminal cases. Preliminary hearings are more common. However, defendants can request one and demand it in accordance with their U.S. constitutional rights.
Okay, well, obviously in this case it wasn't requested. The preliminary hearing was held pretty soon afterwards. I think it was just over a week later.
Okay, so that happened.
So there was really very, very little time. And Cope's lawyer hadn't consulted with him whatsoever. I don't know about Jason's lawyer. Jason's lawyer may have to some extent. I mean, in fact, Cope's lawyer later said that if he'd known there were defence witnesses and there were contradictions in the account, you know, then he would have presented a different defence. But by that time, it was too late. He'd already embarked on this duress defence, which kind of sort of made sense. I mean, you know, you basically assume the women are telling the truth. You know, Jason has done all this, and Cope is just sort of sitting around, and maybe he's just a sort of, you know, being told what to do, and he's, you know, being terrorized into doing what this is. I mean, they've painted Jason as some sort of terroristic figure, some martial arts figure who's, you know, can beat anyone up. In fact, he's actually quite a slight person. He's not a huge giant at all.
I mean, George, let's face it, they don't want Cope. They want Jason. They don't want Cope. They
wanted Jason for reasons that I don't particularly want to go entirely into.
So that means that somehow, Kervin, forgive me, but, you know, you and I have done so many shows about drugs and things of that nature. There is the key to this case for or against Jason is going to be somehow in the drug business. Absolutely. You've got to untangle this drug connection between those women, Jason, his former wife, and the police department that are usually corrupt, dealing in drugs, letting some people go and others not go to get their own stash to sell it. I believe this with all my heart. So I think to untangle the truth of this whole matter is not about the violence or the tape or the proposed rape or kidnapping or all of that sensational red light neon culture, but instead following the drugs. Follow the drugs, and you'll find the crime.
Not quite. There's a bit more to it. But as I keep on saying, there's something here that I don't particularly want to go into. If you get, I'm sure we'll be giving out the website at the end of the thing.
Let me ask you this: was there a prior relationship between any of those women and Mr. Sadowski?
No, they were total strangers. He'd never met them.
He'd never met them. He invited a 44 and 30-year-old woman who are total strangers and obviously meth addicts to his home.
Yes, it was his home. It was also where he had the business. So this martial arts studio where he taught martial arts. I get that,
but I think where David is trying to come from, George, is we're having a shindig, a party, a get together, a gathering, a powwow. Let's and he's invited these two women to his shindig. He's never met them before. He doesn't know them from Adam. But he's bringing them into his home.
It was probably inadvisable, I think we can say.
I agreed, agreed and advisable. But what reason does he give?
What motive? What motive would he
Well, why
have
did
to invite them?
That he got chatting and he said, "I've got this marijuana business."
Okay. Well, that goes into it, you see.
And one of them says, "Oh yeah, I'd like to buy some marijuana from you."
Okay, right. There you go.
And then he says, "Oh, I'm this martial arts coach," and the other says, "Oh yeah, I'm interested in martial arts. I might want to come and train with you." So he says, "Oh well, okay, come over to my studio. It's only about 100 yards away." They did actually drive.
Were others? Were there others already at the house when he did that, or?
No, there's nobody there. He shut it all up for the night.
Right. So this shindig, this party, were people invited after they arrived then?
No. There was no one else invited. I mean, when I called it a party, it was the three of them basically.
Right. Okay.
And then you've got Cope down in the basement, because he lives there. There's nobody else.
Okay.
And then at one point in the early morning, Sarah happens to drop by.
Okay.
And sees the two women in the basement, so she knows the truth about it.
So there is a. I'm not going to put any words into your mouth. There's a good possibility that there was an ulterior motive to Jason inviting the two women, who would have obviously been in a state of dependency. And
I mean, they were probably out to rob him.
Yeah,
and there might have been another motive.
But he would have being in the business himself, right? He would have been able to pick up the signs of a dependent individual, drug dependence.
Well, I'm not sure it would have been so easy. I mean, for a start,
George,
long history of drug abuse. I'm not sure she was on drugs at the time.
Let me interject, right? You're now coming into my ex world.
Sure.
And drug addicts can spot a drug addict from a mile away. They can walk into another city, having never been there before, and spot somebody who's standing on a street corner waiting to score from another dealer so that they can find a way for them to score themselves because they're new to that city. Let me tell you, it's like a magnet. So if George was in the business of procuring, of growing, of dealing, of selling drugs, these two individuals, in their state, it would have been pretty apparent to him that they were off their faces or of the like. So,
well, I don't know. It would. I mean, I think they were somewhat drunk, and he then plied them with alcohol. Partly. So
you've got to ask yourself, what would the jury think his motive would have been for inviting two women in that state and under those terms and conditions back to his home?
Well, he was. I mean, his business is not. It's not Trump Tower. It's it's a small time business.
I understand that. I understand that.
Trying to get some money from coaching
for
people
me personally, without trying to implicate anything, I would hazard a guess that there was an ulterior motive to this party and what could actually come out of this party under the influence of drugs and alcohol. That doesn't justify. That doesn't justify what they did. That doesn't justify the fact that they tried to rob him.
I don't think he spotted they were drug addicts. They were meth users. And I don't even know that she was at the time. I think she had a long history of it. But I think the reason she was more desperate is she had been drinking. She was due in drug court in the morning. She may have been desperate for money for some reason. But the big clincher, I think, is that she was going to be in breach of her probation in drug court in the morning. And she would have lost her children. She was desperately working to get her children back. And you can still see that she's very much working for that. I believe she's actually had some huge number of children, many of which have been born meth addicted. So how much meth she was taking, I don't know. But it doesn't always show. I mean, I've even been told she was taking meth immediately before the preliminary hearing.
You see, again, I can begin to see how the jury could be led to believe that Jason was not going about things the right way. When you look at the state of these women.
I mean, I think what I would describe him as, an overconfident type person.
Yeah. So
he believed.
Let me ask you this: did the police do? George, did the police do a search and seizure on his property and find any significant quantity of marijuana or other drugs?
Well, he had a marijuana grow room, a legal marijuana grow room.
So once the police, a legal one, but once the police found that he dealt in marijuana and he had offered to sell these women who more than likely did not have a prescription to buy a marijuana.
Well, the one told him that she had a license to buy marijuana.
Okay, but once the police came in and saw, don't you think a lot of red flags went up immediately and thought, oh, this could be a drug house? And then,
I don't think so. No.
Okay, well, the police.
I think they saw women apparently taped to poles and thought, this guy's been torturing them to get his money back or something.
But 1 second, you said when the police arrived, there was nobody tied to any poles.
Right.
Well, they weren't. It was a bit mysterious. I mean, Angel wasn't tied to a pole at all, and she didn't claim to have been. She's got this story that she'd been asked to kill Becky. Becky was kind of pretending to be taped to a pole, but when the police told her to lie down, they came in with their guns drawn or whatever, told her to lie down, then she miraculously managed to untie herself from the tape in an instant and got down on the floor. And this
let me say this: the way police are trained in America is they're very, very suspicious people, and they all want to be heroes. So a policeman comes into a house and women are not tied up who said they were tied up, and they see nothing else really out of order. They think, and then they start debating. But they come into a house, and a woman says she's been beat up, and then they see 150 legal weapons in the house. And the women said, well, we just came over to buy a pistol, and I have a license to buy a pistol. All of a sudden, every red flag in that police department goes up, and they're going to harbor in on the owner of that house like, I said earlier, stink on poop. And I think that's what happened here. They came into the house. They were told the worst situation. They found a less the worst situation, but they found out the house has legal marijuana.
No, it's nothing to do with the house. And I keep on coming back to you, Dave. It's nothing to do with the house. You can find out more on the website. But the local police chief was absolutely out to get Jason.
Okay, but why was he out to get him?
He could have even asked the women before. I'm sure we can't prove this, but he could have asked the women to set Jason up.
Okay, but why? Okay, I understand this, but I'm just saying what.
Right from the beginning.
Okay, I'm saying what we, the average person, sees and hears. Okay, we don't know what is in the policeman's mind. Maybe if you could share with us what the police officer had, or chief of police had against Jason, that would help us understand the situation better and find a solution.
That's a whole area I don't want to go into because it won't be before the jury. He had some sort of past, but I just don't want to go into that area.
A past with a police chief or a past in a criminal issue?
He had a criminal issue.
Okay, so they already tagged him as being a bad guy.
Yeah, they were absolutely out to get him. I mean, the police chief's wife was campaigning to get him for previously for a year or so. So there was all this situation, and
so this is kind of like the OJ situation. He got into trouble, he got off, and boy, everybody was waiting for him to make the next misstep.
I mean, whether the women were actually sent to target him, set him up, and inform on him, I wouldn't like to say. I don't really have the evidence to say that. That's a possibility. But anyway, that's certainly what happened, and they turned into informants.
So where's Jason now? Where is he now?
Oh, he's in jail, in the local jail, waiting the trial. I mean, it's not long to the trial now.
A county jail. How long has he been in county jail? Since 2014?
Oh no, he would have been transferred to prison. I'm not sure how long he's been back in the local jail. I really don't know. Presumably, possibly since the decision to to go for a retrial, I guess.
Right. Remand. Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't able to get bail. Obviously, he hasn't been out. He's been basically, in prison or jail the whole time. I don't know the exact detail of when he was transferred.
Is anyone covering the situation in the local press now?
I've been led to believe there will be considerable press coverage once the trial starts.
And has his side done anything to try and direct the press in a more neutral fashion instead of just being fed by the prosecution and sensationalism?
The press are not going to play along. The press are in the hands of the local police. You know, it's a pretty common situation. They're not going to go against the local police in any way, shape, or form.
That's correct.
I'm not saying they will misreport the trial, you know, but you can put up headlines, can't you? You know.
Yeah.
The only he did give an interview. Okay, so this is something you may want to go and look at for yourself if you really want to go into it. This is the whole area. He gave an interview, actually not so, before the first trial, and that interview was then withheld. This was to a local blog, not to a regular news organisation. It's to basically a local, I'm not even sure what you call it, but it's called Upastars. And you can read the Upastars interview. It's online on his website, and it explains a lot of the reasons why the police chief was out to get him, how he was actually misportrayed to Angel and Becky by the local police chief, who's called Willie, and I've just seen a photograph of him recently, and he looks quite a character, if you know what I mean. He's not exactly, you know, what you might expect a police chief to look like. I don't know if I can forward the photo to you. I mean, he looks a bit like something that came out of the woods.
Oh no.
So, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, he's obviously off duty here. Maybe that's a little bit unfair. But he's got he's got this massive white beard. He's got a cap on, a rather gaily covered thing. Okay, it's maybe that's not really. He obviously hasn't got his uniform on, but he doesn't look. You know, he looks like he's in his late 50s, 60s or something, and he looks like, you know, he's probably more used to, I don't know what they do in northern Michigan, shooting bears or something. And he had this big. He and his wife had this big grudge, and it could have been based on a misunderstanding about Jason's past, which you can read about more by going to the website and things. So you keep on pressing me on that, and I keep on saying I didn't want to go into that area. Okay,
right. I'm sorry.
I mean, there's really interesting little points in the evidence here. I mean, I find it interesting because you can go right back to the 911 call, and the dispatcher on the 911 call seems to actually already be not believing what she's being told. Because the 911 girl goes, dispatcher, hello. Angel says, please get here fast. I could actually try and play it, so that would be interesting. Would you be able to hear it if I did that?
It depends on how you amplified it.
Can you hear anything?
Not at the moment. Nope. No, we're not hearing a thing. Nope.
You're not getting that?
Nope.
Okay.
No.
Well, I ought to say, I mean, if you Google Jason Sadowski, you're going to find the website that I put up pretty quickly.
I've got the website up in front of me.
And the 911 calls on that. So anyway, she's saying to the dispatcher, I'm held hostage. We've been tied against the pole with duct tape for ours. I suppose that would be poles, probably, plural. Please get here fast. And then the dispatcher says, who else with you? Me and my friend that's still tied to the pole. Okay. Your friend is still tied to the pole. That's the dispatcher. And then Angel says, can you hear me? And the dispatcher says again, see, your friend is still tied to a pole. Angel says, yes. Now, it turns out that was a lie. She wasn't still tied to a pole. And that's actually sort of a key to the case, because Jason's whole story is that he came downstairs while all this was going on, and he cut all the tape off and said, I'm totally pissed off with all this. I'm going to go and get you some coffee to sober you up, which is a sort of kind of reasonable response. And so the big point really here is that actually Becky wasn't tied to the pole during the 911 call. And later on, Angel is being interviewed by the police, and she keeps saying she asked Becky to pick up the phone just after the 911 call. So
how could
she's
she?
saying
So how could
Becky
she pick up the phone if she's taped to a pole?
How can she pick up the phone if she's taped to a pole?
None of it makes sense. Did they find tape or any materials that could be
they
used?
recovered tape. There was tape all over the place, although not nearly as much as there ought to have been, according to what the women's account was. So that whole key point here is that she's saying to Becky, pick up the phone. She's forgotten that Becky's meant to be tied to a pole when she's telling this part of her made-up story. And for me, that really seals the deal.
Is it possible that once the issue of them being drug dependent on meths is brought into the arena, that it could be made out that they might not have been as mindful on the evidence as or as straight-headed as they needed to be, but believable enough to believe them against him?
Yeah, I mean, it seems that the jury must have believed some of what they were saying, but not all of it, maybe. I mean, that's the only way you can reasonably make a sort of case, that the jury presumably didn't believe them about how much money they stole. I can't imagine, because there were so many discrepancies there and it didn't make any sense. But supposing the jury says, okay, yeah, they're lying about that. Okay, but really, they stole this money and he overacted, and he punched them and said, I want my money back, and then he took them downstairs, and we don't even believe how he took them downstairs. We don't believe this story about the sword, maybe. Okay, but we believe he punched them, we believe he took them downstairs. And then we also believe he took them to the polls to make them give the money back. So there you have it.
Here's the other thing, George. I know you're not prepared to go into his past, but did they go into his past at the trial?
Yes. In as much as the police chief, Willie, related to them basically a total lie about his past, which is not unblemished, but it was a way exaggeration of
whether he lied to them or not, any reasonable.
And what happened
hang
then?
on a minute, George. 1 second, George.
Hold with me a minute. Hold with me a minute. The women then said, during the trial, they basically repeated this hearsay, and that came in.
But any reasonable defence would have just pulled up his record and said, hang on a minute, yep, he has got this and he has got that, but he hasn't got this and he's not that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one for the defence. Okay.
Why is it tricky? Either it is or it isn't. And
that's one strategy they could bring up.
If he has a criminal past, it's either on record or it's not.
If you're on trial, your criminal past is not. I mean, his criminal past is when he was 17 years old, 25 years earlier.
Right. Okay.
And if you're on trial, you do not really want to be bringing that up, but it did, in effect, come in via the hearsay of the women who repeated what the police chief Willie had told them. So, which wasn't even true.
But again, as I said, whether it was true or not, the fact that it came in as evidence through them, it can now be contested. If it wasn't true,
you can only. It was half true. You got a
half truth or not truth. If they've brought it in and it's now been entered as evidence and it's now been recorded by the
it's something they're saying he said.
Yeah. But the police chief has said it, so therefore his record could now be looked at, and it could now be submitted as evidence that this is not true. There is no charge. There is no conviction.
It could be, but it's also grossly prejudicial that he's been in prison before. I mean, this is the whole area I didn't want to go into.
No, I understand that, but I would rather them know that I was guilty of doing what I was guilty of doing and going to jail for.
I mean, I believe Jason actually wanted that to happen, but his attorney went the opposite way. And I'm not sure what's going to happen at the retrial.
David, I'm just going to bring you in here a minute, because none of this makes sense to me. From top to bottom, the whole handling of the trial, that handling of the police arrival at the premises and what they found and how they followed through that investigation, how it went to court, how it was overturned, and the grounds, if any, for bringing it back to trial again. I'm lost here, and I would imagine so is our audience.
Well, I think a lot of people are surprised it's coming back to trial.
First of all, I think you can't ignore the fact that demographically, this part of America, what they call the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, is very poor. Manufacturing mining jobs they once had. It's probably the town in which Jason Sadowski lives is probably 96% white. And I would say 100% of those have never even left the county, much less seen anything else. Now they're invaded with drugs. Methamphetamine is a major crisis up there. Every day you can read in the newspaper saying a man agrees to plead guilty to murder and plead 20 years in prison if they release his girlfriend and return her daughter. It's horrible. So you've got this methamphetamine crisis, and the police are eager to solve it because the mayor and elected officials want to be reelected. They're getting a lot of money from the federal government to do it. They've got to show results. They've got a guy with a prior conviction, 2 girls who they know to be methamphetamine addicts in his house for no apparent reason. It just piles up, and he is part of the statistics. So while George, very, very wonderfully, in my opinion, and he's a hero, George and other people look at Jason and other people as individuals who are suffering the consequences of a justice system that has decided to dip a big can into the ocean and just pull out all the guilty and the innocent. You know, if you're fishing for shrimp, you pull out the lobster and the fish and the squid and the dolphin and everything else with it, and you throw away. But the ones you catch and it can make a good display of, you do that. And so what happens is, in these towns where there's no money, a lot of unemployment, a lot of anger, a lot of revenge, a lot of vindictiveness, a jury sits on judgment of a fellow citizen, and they get to play God all of a sudden. And this guy is denied justice because of a lawyer who's overwhelmed, because of a court system that just wants to count up numbers, because of a prosecutor who wants to get reelected, and because of a police chief who wants to be a hero. And that's really it. It's the
I have to say that they did actually award themselves medals or something afterwards.
Oh, I'm sure they did. And they got promoted. But it's the dehumanization of the individual as a result of the delegitimization of the process of justice, which leads to the further downfall and breakup of the entire community. Because where there's no justice, there can be no community, because there can be no trust. And that's what's happened. So think of him as a dolphin in a tuna fisherman's net. The tuna fisherman is out there to catch tuna. And they do catch very big tuna, Al Capone and other criminals. But sometimes they catch a dolphin. Guess what? That dolphin gets killed too. And it's
they don't toss them back.
No, they kill them. And they use them for bait or whatever. And so Mr. Sadowski is a man who pretended to be a tuna at one point in his life, and that's his criminal conviction of the past, or criminal problem of the past. And now all of a sudden he gets caught up in a nighttime situation in which tuna are being caught, and he's caught, and he can't change the fact that he once dressed as a tuna. And so this dolphin is going down, and they're going to make sure he goes down, because they think in their little brain he's running a drug house, he's running a prostitution house, he's hanging out with methamphetamine addicts who do prostitution, he's dealing with bad women, he's in the wrong place at the wrong time doing the wrong thing, and got caught up in a person without money. And if he had money, if he was worth $10 million like Donald in Russia, he would have no problem in the world. But he's a poor schmuck in Upper Handle Peninsula, in a place where people are backwards, uneducated, and not prosperous, angry, vindictive, and they want justice.
I mean, what I feel from the moment those police arrived, an Angel was screaming, and we're being tied to poles. The police have a decision to make: who are we going to arrest here? Yeah,
right. And they got him.
The moment they made the decision, which is an understandable decision, the women apparently take to poles, and she's telling them these two men have taken us to poles. Who are you going to arrest? Okay, fair enough. They've arrested the two men. At that point, you can't say the police have done anything particularly wrong. Any police officer would probably do that. But having arrested the two men, they don't want to admit they've made any mistake at any point. That's what this is all about. Nobody wants to admit making a mistake, and then it's all over the news, right? Now,
people are demanding justice. And
so they're taking it to trial. They're trying to fix the case up. They're ignoring the little gaps and holes and problems with the women's testimony and the fact that they're not credible and the story's totally incredible. And they're taking to trial, and they've managed to get a conviction because of other things. They managed to join the two trials, which was grossly prejudicial to Jason, certainly, and to both of them. And then they've given the inadequate lawyers.
How is Jason doing now? I know I don't want to step on Kervin's feet, but I know we have 4 or 5 minutes left. How is Jason doing as a person, as an individual, holding up, managing jail?
I wouldn't like to comment too much on that. I know Sarah has visited him recently. She's doing absolutely everything she can. She's been a total heroine in all this. Incidentally, you can read about her. She was a 9/11 responder. She's also she was injured when she was in an ambulance that turned over. She was working as a volunteer, and her ambulance rolled over and left her paraplegic. So, she's having to do physiotherapy the whole time. She managed to learn to walk again.
She sounds like a real hero.
And she spent her life savings hiring this lawyer.
Yeah.
So that's, I'm doing this not just for Jason. I think it's partly for her as well, because she needs to be vindicated.
George,
she's been accused of being a liar, of course.
Let me just say that we here at Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio, we take our hat off to you. We take our hat off to anybody that stands in the gap and becomes an advocate and supporter for miscarriages of justice anywhere it rears its ugly head. We have come to the end of today's broadcast, but I just wanted to give you a minute to direct people to the websites and any other information that they may need to get in order for them to support this absolutely worthy cause and case.
I'm sure if anyone Googles Jason Sadowski, they're going to rapidly find what they need to find. It's Free Coach on Facebook.
Okay. And again, we'd just like to thank you for sharing this story with us. We look forward to, in fact, we're hoping that we can come and revisit this after it goes back to trial in March.
I really believe he will be acquitted on all charges.
Then maybe we'll have an update on that, and we'll be able to go into stuff a bit deeper that we couldn't go into on this particular show, to really highlight and focus the incompetence that is so inevitable in this particular case. Dr. David, do you want a minute to round up?
I don't have much to add. I think George is great for doing this, but I would reinforce a statement I made earlier. Do not underestimate the power of the press and mass media to help your cause. Too many lawyers suggest that the defense stay silent. The defendant should stay silent, but that doesn't mean those defending him should remain silent.
Absolutely.
And I would do everything in my power to get his friends and allies out there and to try to find a friendly reporter somewhere, and don't just count them out automatically. You'll be surprised what you can find, especially when it can be a groundbreaking thing. Don't underestimate the power of mass media and the press. That was a mistake I've seen way too often committed, and it gives leeway to the other side.
Thank you
Other
very
than
much,
that,
guys.
I wish you good luck. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There is no show next week.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah.
And
Thank you, George. Yeah.
it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you all very much. Just to remind you, there is no show next week, and we'll see you on March the 4th with Food Not Bomb. We're out of here. Thank you, David. Thank you, George. This is all that we've got time for on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. We're out of here.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime.